Power is rarely wielded by those who appear strongest. The truly cunning know that weakness, when mastered, becomes the deadliest weapon. Today, you will learn how the weak quietly dominate the strong, without them ever realizing it. Observe the world, and you will see a theater of illusions. Those who boast strength often crumble beneath their own pride, while those deemed weak patiently weave webs of influence. In the shadows of society, power is never earned by force alone. It is seized by the patient, the perceptive, and the strategically restrained. In this study, we shall uncover the hidden mechanics by which the weak manipulate, outthink, and ultimately control those who believe themselves invincible. Prepare yourself to view weakness not as limitation, but as the ultimate instrument of dominion. Have you ever noticed how those who shout the loudest, who brandish their power like a sword, are often the easiest to predict? Strength, when displayed openly, carries with it a dangerous vulnerability. Those who parade their dominance believe themselves untouchable. Yet it is precisely this arrogance that the observant, the patient, and the seemingly weak exploit with deadly efficiency. Consider the Roman general Gaius Marius. He commanded legions with iron discipline, his victories legendary. Yet his overconfidence blinded him to the quiet manipulations within his own ranks. It was the subtle plotting of those he underestimated, the men deemed insignificant, that ultimately shifted the tides against him. The strongest are often blind to the strategies of the weak, because strength conceals arrogance, and arrogance blinds the mind. Why do you think the powerful fall so often? Not to overwhelming force, but to cunning that appears insignificant. It is because the strong measure threats by size, by force, by overt aggression. They are hunters who cannot perceive the trap until it is sprung, and the weak, aware of this blindness, do not confront, they observe. They study the habits, desires, and fears of the mighty. They understand that to dominate the strong, one need not challenge them openly, one must manipulate the arena in which they believe themselves supreme. Look to the courts of Renaissance Italy. Princes surrounded themselves with armies, with advisors, with lavish displays of wealth. Yet it was often the overlooked courtiers, the servants, the whisperers in shadows, who shaped decisions more decisively than any blade. These were not men of brute force, but men of patience and insight. They planted seeds of doubt, encouraged mistrust, and guided the hand of power without ever stepping into the light. What does this tell you? That the true measure of control is invisible. It is the quiet hand behind the throne that directs the storm. Ask yourself, when you encounter someone who seems invincible, do you feel intimidated, or do you observe? Do you seek to meet force with force, or do you study the gaps in their armor, the inconsistencies in their judgment, the arrogance that blinds them? The weak do not confront head-on. They bait, they misdirect, they exploit perception itself. When a general moves too boldly, because he believes he is invulnerable, the weak engineer the conditions for his undoing. When a CEO acts as if no rival can touch him, the underappreciated analyst or cunning assistant quietly shifts outcomes in ways the powerful never foresee. Even history's greatest conquerors, Napoleon, Caesar, Alexander, were wary of the seemingly weak. They knew the danger of underestimation. And yet, so often, those in positions of confidence ignore this wisdom. Why? Pride. A leader wrapped in the illusion of strength cannot fathom that someone they deem weak could possess the patience, insight, and audacity to control them from the shadows. And in that blindness lies opportunity. Consider the psychological mechanics at play. The strong rely on projection. They see the world as they are, measuring threat by outward show. The weak exploit this projection. By presenting themselves as harmless, unambitious, or subservient, they lull the strong into a false sense of security. Each misstep of the arrogant, the misplaced trust, the ignored advice, the boastful gesture, becomes a weapon. And the weak, those invisible strategists, wield it silently. Now think about your own life. How often do you mistake loud confidence for true power? How often have you seen someone collapse, not because of the opposition, but because they underestimated the patient, the overlooked, the seemingly weak? The lesson is stark strength is a mirror. The weak become shadows that manipulate the reflection. They do not need to be seen, they only need to be understood. And in that understanding lies control. So, the next time you face someone stronger, someone louder, someone who seems untouchable, do not rush to confront them. Watch, wait, study, learn the patterns of their arrogance. And then, at the precise moment, strike in the mind before the body, in the perception before the act. For it is always easier to move the world through subtlety than through force. If you think this lesson ends here, you are mistaken. Because the weak do not merely observe, they also manipulate the very perception of strength itself. They create illusions, bend reality, and prepare the battlefield so that the mighty fight wars they cannot win unknowingly. And that is where the true mastery begins. What if I told you that your greatest weakness could be your deadliest weapon? That the very flaws you hide, the insecurities you bury, the limitations you despair over, these are the tools of subtle dominion. The world teaches you to mask weakness, to appear strong, to feign invulnerability. But the truly cunning understand that vulnerability, when wielded with precision, is invisible power. Look to the life of Julius Caesar. Even in his ascension, he displayed calculated humility. He cultivated the image of a man who could be wronged, a man approachable, even fragile in certain moments. Why? Because vulnerability draws attention, sympathy, and, most importantly, trust. The citizens, the senators, the soldiers, they underestimated the danger in his apparent openness. They felt they could manipulate him, yet in doing so, they walked into the traps he quietly constructed. Weakness disarms suspicion, and suspicion is the shield of the strong. Ask yourself, when was the last time you truly observed someone's weaknesses? Not to exploit them as a predator, but to understand how they are perceived. Humans are drawn to what appears fragile. They lean in to protect, to guide, to influence. And here lies the paradox. The moment you allow them to see your vulnerability, you create leverage. The strong, blinded by pride, do not recognize that the empathetic act of protection can be a snare. Every act of seeming weakness can subtly guide decisions, alter perceptions, and redirect influence, all without a single open confrontation. Consider the cunning strategies of Elizabeth I of England. She allowed herself to appear indecisive at times, vacillating over minor matters. The nobles assumed weakness, assumed uncertainty. Yet every apparent hesitation was deliberate, calculated to observe alliances, test loyalties, and manipulate ambitions. Her vulnerability was a mirror in which courtiers glimpsed opportunity, and were drawn into her design. What lesson does this teach you? That weakness is not absence of strength. It is camouflage, a method of control invisible to those who measure power only in displays of force. Now, reflect on human psychology. People respond instinctively to vulnerability. It triggers empathy, lowers defenses, and encourages projection. When someone perceives you as needing guidance or protection, they unconsciously position themselves within your orbit, believing they hold influence. And here lies the brilliance of the weak. They do not confront the strong with aggression. They invite them to act, to intervene, to engage, while the weak observe and learn. Every gesture of help the strong provide can be anticipated, directed, and ultimately turned into leverage. Even history's greatest manipulators understood this. Talleyrand, the French diplomat, mastered the art of seeming frailty. He presented himself as cautious, almost submissive, while orchestrating the fall of rivals and the ascent of allies. No army, no sword, no overt power. Simply the perception of vulnerability. He weaponized what others dismissed as weakness. And when his adversaries moved, believing they held advantage, he controlled outcomes from behind the veil of apparent fragility. Ask yourself, how often do you see your own limitations as obstacles rather than tools? How often have you hidden what could, if revealed strategically, manipulate the very hands that might oppose you? Every flaw, every moment of seeming uncertainty, every human hesitation carries potential. The weak do not simply survive. They exploit the instinctive reactions of the strong. They create the illusion that they are controlled, while in truth, they steer the course of events. This is not morality. It is calculation. It is psychology sharpened to a blade. Vulnerability becomes a prism through which you refract reality, bending perception to your advantage. It is the quiet power of being underestimated, the mastery of appearing fragile while the strong unwittingly obey your design. So, consider your own life. How could you reveal just enough weakness to provoke action, to influence decisions, to lure the overconfident into the patterns you have prepared for them? How could the very act of appearing powerless allow you to control those who believe themselves untouchable? And know this, the moment you begin to understand this principle, you step into a shadowed realm of power few dare to enter. Because the weak, once they understand the art of weaponized vulnerability, are never truly weak again. They are predators disguised as prey, architects of outcomes they never appear to command. But mastery is never complete, because vulnerability alone is insufficient. It must be combined with perception, patience, and the cold calculus of timing. And that is where the next secret lies, the subtle art of bending the strong not through weakness alone, but through the intricate orchestration of desire, fear, and dependence. Have you ever noticed how the most powerful men often fail to see the strings being pulled from behind? They believe that influence comes only from authority, from wealth, from armies. And yet history whispers a different truth. True control is rarely exerted through overt force. It is quiet, invisible, a manipulation so precise that the strongest are unaware they are dancing to someone else's tune. Take Cardinal Richelieu, the minister of kings, who never wielded a sword in battle yet directed the destiny of France. He understood that people are moved more by perception than reality, by emotion than fact. A whisper here, a carefully placed rumor there, a strategic alliance disguised as coincidence. These were his instruments, and while kings and nobles flexed muscles, Richelieu subtly choreographed events, bending the powerful without ever appearing to touch them. Ask yourself, when you influence someone, do you rely on authority, or do you study their weaknesses, their desires, their blind spots? Manipulation is not about aggression. It is about orchestration. It is the patient, deliberate shaping of circumstance so that others act in accordance with your plan, believing themselves free. They are actors in a play you direct, and yet they do not even know they are on stage. Consider the psychological reality. Humans are predictably irrational. They act on emotion, habit, and projection. The strong, drunk on confidence, often misread the intentions of those they deem weak. They assume the meek will comply, that the humble will obey, that the quiet cannot influence. And here lies the advantage. Manipulation exploits this overconfidence. The weak do not strike openly, they craft scenarios that guide choices, influence perceptions, and create dependency, all without ever appearing coercive. History provides endless examples. Take Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor of Germany. He manipulated not through brute force, but through diplomatic subtlety, public perception, and private persuasion. Wars were waged, alliances formed and broken, and yet it was often Bismarck's unseen hand guiding decisions, nudging the mighty toward actions that served his grand strategy. The lesson is clear: the subtle manipulator never confronts the strong directly. He engineers conditions where the strong act against their own self-interest, while believing they are masters of their fate. Ask yourself this: how often do you see people act against their own advantage simply because someone has shaped their perception? The manipulation of the mind is more potent than the manipulation of the body. If you can guide thought, you can direct action. And if you can control perception, you can dictate reality itself. That is the power of subtlety. That is the power of the weak who understand the mechanics of influence. Even literature captures this principle. Think of Shakespeare's Ego, who bends Othello's trust and jealousy like clay. Othello, mighty and confident, falls not because of physical force, but because Ego understood his fears, his desires, and his blind spots. Ego never attacks openly, he orchestrates, insinuates, and persuades. And when Othello strikes, he strikes according to Ego's plan, never realizing he has been controlled. The same principle applies in every domain: business, politics, war, and life itself. Here is a question to confront yourself with. Are you content to act openly, relying on brute strength, while the quiet ones manipulate behind the curtain? Or will you study the subtle forces that shape decisions, the hidden currents of influence that guide the powerful without their knowledge? To manipulate effectively, you must become invisible. Your presence should not intimidate, it should guide. Your words should suggest, not command. Your actions should create the impression of randomness, while every detail serves a purpose. This is the essence of psychological strategy today: to bend without breaking, to influence without exposing your hand. Every interaction becomes a battlefield of perception, every conversation an opportunity to shape choices, and every apparent coincidence a carefully calculated step in a larger design. So, as you reflect on this, understand that manipulation is not a game of force. It is a game of patience, observation, and precision. The weak do not confront. They orchestrate. They steer outcomes while the strong believe themselves unbound. They are puppeteers invisible to their own puppets. And yet, manipulation alone is not sufficient. Influence must be combined with timing, with perception, with the subtle exploitation of desire and fear. Because even the best manipulator can fail if he strikes too soon, too late, or without understanding the currents that move the powerful. The next secret lies in this intersection: the careful weaving of patience and perception to bend the strongest to your will, without them ever realizing it. Do you understand the true advantage of waiting? In a world obsessed with immediate action, those who strike without pause often stumble. The weak, however, have mastered what the strong rarely comprehend. Patience is not passivity. It is power waiting to be exercised at the precise moment. It is the art of letting others reveal themselves, of observing mistakes before committing to the decisive move. Consider Hannibal, the Carthaginian general who lingered in the Alps, letting Rome overextend, exhaust, and miscalculate. He did not charge blindly. He waited. He watched. And when the moment was perfect, he struck with devastating effect. Patience magnified his limited resources, turned perceived weakness into tactical dominance. The strong often rush, believing speed equals control, yet it is the deliberate, the patient, who dictate outcomes while appearing still. Ask yourself, when have you acted too quickly, only to regret it? When have others acted hastily against you, revealing their arrogance and making themselves vulnerable? Patience is more than restraint. It is the cultivation of advantage. The weak can wait while the strong exhaust themselves, revealing patterns, desires, and weaknesses that were previously hidden. Every impulsive decision by the confident is a gift to the strategic observer. Every boast, every display of force, every hurried judgment creates openings invisible to the arrogant. History is full of examples. Take Abraham Lincoln, whose patience during the American Civil War was not a lack of action but a deliberate strategy. He allowed his adversaries to overextend, to fracture under their own pride, while he prepared his own moves carefully. He understood that time is the instrument through which the weak orchestrate control over the mighty. Immediate victories can be hollow. Timing ensures the permanent triumph of calculated strength. Even in human psychology, patience is a weapon. People reveal their true nature through routine, through patterns, through emotional reactions. The strong often rush to assert dominance, to respond to challenges with immediacy. The weak, by contrast, observe. They learn when anger will betray, when desire can be manipulated, when trust can be earned only to be redirected. Patience allows influence to accumulate unnoticed, until the moment of execution becomes inevitable. Ask yourself, when you face someone stronger, more confident, more aggressive, do you react instinctively, or do you wait? Do you allow your opponent to exhaust themselves, to reveal overconfidence, to expose their own vulnerabilities? Every impatient action they take is an opportunity for you to shape events, to steer outcomes, to build power silently while appearing powerless. Consider Queen Victoria, who ruled an empire not by constant display of force, but through careful observation, the slow cultivation of alliances, and a deliberate understanding of rival powers. Her patience allowed her to navigate political crises that might have toppled more impulsive rulers. The weak, when patient, gain not just knowledge, but leverage. They turn time itself into a weapon that strikes precisely when the moment is most advantageous. Even in personal encounters, patience transforms the weak into masters of influence. When someone seeks to provoke you, do you retaliate immediately, or do you wait? When others rush to dominate conversation, decision, or negotiation, do you react or do you observe and plan your response? The impatient reveal their hand. The patient shape the battlefield of perception. Patience allows you to act when others are exhausted, when their confidence falters, when their arrogance blinds them. And now, reflect on this: the weak do not need to move quickly. They do not need to impress with force or intimidate with volume. They wait, they calculate, they observe. And when the perfect moment arrives, their action is decisive, absolute, and almost inevitable. They strike with precision because they understand that time is not their enemy. It is their ally. They transform delay into domination. But mastery of patience is only the beginning. For waiting alone is not enough. The patient must combine observation with subtle manipulation, understanding the desires and fears of those they study. Only then can they turn the strong's own momentum against them, bending events and people to their will without appearing to act. And this is where the next secret lies, not in waiting, but in the orchestration of influence over time. The ability to manipulate without detection, to guide the decisions of the strong while they remain convinced they are in control. This is where weakness becomes invisible power. Have you ever considered that the most insidious form of power is the power that is invisible? That true control does not lie in fear, intimidation, or conquest, but in creating a state of reliance so profound that even the strongest cannot act without you. Dependence is the ultimate weapon of the weak, for it transforms apparent weakness into silent dominion. Look to the courts of Louis XIV, the Sun King. His nobles, lavishly adorned and proud, believed themselves masters of their own estates. Yet he carefully cultivated systems that made them reliant on royal favor, financial support, and political appointments. Those who once imagined themselves independent found themselves tethered, their ambitions and actions dictated by the very person they thought subordinate. Dependence is subtle, it is invisible, and it is far more powerful than overt coercion. Ask yourself in your life, how often do you create reliance without appearing to do so? How often do you allow others to think they are free while their choices are quietly bound by your influence? The weak understand that control is not taken by force. It is ceded willingly through necessity and trust. And when the strong unknowingly rely on you, their hands move not by their will, but by the subtle architecture you have constructed. History offers countless examples. Consider the Italian city-states of the Renaissance. Merchants, bankers, and advisors, though appearing modest, held the strings of kings and princes. The Medici family, for instance, did not conquer through armies alone. They made rulers dependent on their wealth, their counsel, their networks. Over time, power shifted quietly, almost imperceptibly, from the ostensibly weak to those who had built a foundation of reliance. Those who believe themselves independent are often the most vulnerable to this type of control. Even psychological studies confirm this. Humans are predictably inclined to favor what they need. When someone provides resources, guidance, or stability, a subtle loyalty forms. Dependence breeds trust, and trust can be molded into influence. The strong, confident, and arrogant rarely notice how often their decisions are shaped by those they believe serve them. And this is the genius of the weak. They do not seize overt authority. They engineer a network of necessity in which the powerful cannot function without their participation. Consider Napoleon's generals. Many believed they commanded armies and strategies independently, yet the success of their campaigns relied heavily on the logistical networks, the support staff, and the intelligence operatives, the invisible hands who shaped outcomes. The generals acted boldly, believing themselves sovereign, while the real control lay in the intricate web of dependence they did not perceive. The strongest often act as if free, yet their freedom is an illusion when the right dependencies are in place. Ask yourself, how could you construct such dependence in your own interactions? Could you become indispensable, not through aggression, but through the quiet provision of value, the subtle shaping of opportunity, and the manipulation of reliance? Every favor given, every resource offered, every skill shared strategically can create a subtle architecture of control. The weak, through patience and insight, guide the strong as if by invisible strings. Even in personal relationships, the principle holds. Consider the mentor, the confidant, the advisor who is quietly essential. Those who seem powerless, whose influence is underestimated, can steer decisions, shape behavior, and mold outcomes precisely because others rely on them. Dependence is authority without confrontation, influence without exposure, and once the strong are reliant, their perception of independence is the final illusion. Reflect on this: the weak do not need armies, wealth, or intimidation to dominate. They create structures of necessity. They craft reliance so that even those who believe themselves in control act according to the design of the unseen strategist. And in this dependence, the illusion of freedom becomes the very cage in which the mighty operate. But the final mastery is never merely creating dependence. It is maintaining it without detection. For awareness dissolves reliance, and suspicion invites rebellion. The true strategist knows how to weave necessity, value, and trust into a system so complete that the strong cannot act without consent that they mistakenly believe is their own. And now, as you consider the power of dependence, understand this: those who grasp this principle do not merely influence the strong, they own the very stage upon which the strong perform. And what comes next is the ultimate revelation: how the weak combine all these strategies. Illusion, patience, manipulation, vulnerability, and dependence, to become not just survivors, but rulers in a world that worships overt power. Power is rarely taken by force. True control is unseen, silent, invisible. The weak, patient and calculating, bend the strong without confrontation. They weaponize vulnerability, manipulate perception, and orchestrate outcomes while the mighty believe themselves free. Dependence becomes their throne, patience becomes their sword. Every boast, every act of pride by the strong is a gift waiting to be seized. Ask yourself, how often have you overlooked the quiet strategist in your own life? How often have the loudest, proudest, or seemingly strongest been guided by those they never noticed? This is the dark calculus of influence, the art of controlling people without them ever realizing it. It is not cruelty. It is precision, not deception for its own sake, but mastery over perception, emotion, and circumstance. Now, the question becomes yours: will you act, or will you be acted upon? Will you remain a pawn, or will you learn to guide the game unseen? Comment your thoughts below. Share your experiences. Subscribe for more Machiavellian strategies. And share this knowledge with those ready to wield it wisely. The shadows are waiting. Will you step into them?